let me, yes, recording the progress. Great. Let me actually, oh, can you enable screen sharing? All right, trying.
Can you screen share now?
Yep.
All right.
Can you guys see this? I hope so. All right. I'll take that as a yes.
They can see it on Zoom. Can you guys see it? You guys good?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Cool. Hello, everyone. Excited to be here. It's an honor to present to future entrepreneurs. Today, I'll talk a little bit about our journey from the beginning days to kind of becoming a unicorn and beyond. And also a couple of lessons that we learned along the way of trying to bring the company where we started out in Korea, trying to become global. What are some of the key takeaways that we learned, and some of the frameworks that I personally use on hopefully on a day-to-day basis to manage a startup, build a company, get to product market fit, and then continue to use that to scale the company. So I'll get started. So just a quick intro, I'm founder CEO of Sendbird, where we went through Y Combinator back in winter 16. So it's been about 6 years as Sendbird. Actually, the company's a little bit older because we were doing something else. We pivoted to Sendbird. I'm also like a general partner at Valon Capital, which is like a basic solo GP fund with a fancy name. It's a small seed fund that I've been running 6 months ago because everyone else is doing it. I'm like, why not? So it's been fun engaging with early stage founders. Anyway, from formation stage to pre-series A, pretty much. Also, as a previously founder CEO of Paprika Lab, which is a social gaming company. We got acquired. And a little bit of fun fact was I was Korea's #1 Unreal Tournament champion, undefeated, and then was actually started as double E, and then I graduated computer science. So that's a little bit about me. Before I dig in, I want to share a little bit about what we do here at Sendbird. Basically, the problem we're trying to solve is messaging conversations are becoming a bigger component of our daily lives across like healthcare, visiting a doctor over telemedicine, sending money to a friend, ordering food on, let's say, a customer like DoorDash. So we want to help our customers embed conversations capability into their applications as easily as possible. And thankfully, after 6 years of building, blood, sweat, and a lot of soil and drinking, we are the #1 conversations platform for mobile applications. So today we power over 250 million users on a monthly basis, sending billions of messages. We have about close to 340 employees globally in 7 countries. And we have raised a little bit over $200 million funding from Iconic Capital, Tiger Global, SoftBank Vision Fund, and so forth. So that's kind of what we do. And these are some of the customers that we work with. We pretty much work with the largest unicorns and decacorns across the globe. DoorDash, if you are using DoorDash to order food, thank you so much. We also power chat on apps like Reddit, Yahoo Fantasy Sports, and probably a lot of the games that you play, whether it be PUBG and Nexon or NCSoft games and things like that. But not just predominantly in the US, but really across the globe as well. Couple example, but I'll skip the details. So let me tell you a little bit about how this all began. And as in all kind of startup, like in the early days, it wasn't as glamorous. I don't think it's glamorous today either, but this is where we began. So you probably recall the song Gangnam Style. This was a song that was popular exactly about 10 years ago. So we started our company right at the heart of Gangnam, literally at the Gangnam station. But these are co-founders that we got together back in 2013. These were people that I worked in my previous startup. We worked together, then we sold our company. So we're like, okay, let's do this again. We started on a small, 300 square feet office where we fit up to 5 people. Actually, it's kind of funny because one of our co-founders wanted to like live by himself. So we had a sleeping bag. So when we went home that evening, he would actually pull out his sleeping bag and sleep in the office, use the bathroom to take shower. And then in the morning, he would greet us back into the office. So that was kind of our setup. We've been working out of there. Of course, I'm wearing ties, so Peter Thiel probably would not back me. So I had to get rid of that. But anyway, so that's kind of where we started out. We initially started out as a consumer application company building community app for moms. So never done B2B before, but here we are today. So this was kind of our first startup competition, same year. It was in Korea, about $4,000. I think we spent all of that money in a week drinking like expensive alcohol and sushi. So good luck with all the money. But anyway, it was one of our very first wins, and we're pretty happy about it. And then we were very, very frugal. I hope we're still frugal today, but we're cockroach frugal. So we are always looking for free working spaces. And thankfully, there were a lot of like co-working spaces provided, subsidized by like chaebols or Korean government. So we like basically did office hopping to looking for free space. And this was one of the very nicer office space where we practically used for free as much as possible. It was the open space, small space, but we try to fit in as many people as possible. And this was around 2015 when we were pivoting from this consumer app for moms to Sendbird, which is a B2B, again, we started as a chat API. This was a pretty big pivot. Back then in Korea, like there was no such thing as API company nor SaaS company. So we were pretty much the first gen of that. And if you look at closely, we actually ran out of space. So we were starting to share a same desk. So there was basically a partition using a calendar as a partition, and I was sharing the desk with one of my co-founders. So that's kind of how we hustled. And we were always competing with another startup that was like next door neighbor. They were working extreme long hours. We were like trying to win them with working hours, which is not really a healthy thing to do, but that's kind of how we survived in the early days. In 2015, because of some of the government funding, I had a chance to fly out to Silicon Valley, attended a couple like free conferences. I'm like, hey, I like the weather here. I want to live here. So you know what? I want to come to Silicon Valley. Actually, well, that's not the entire reason. I'll explain a little bit later why we decided to come to Silicon Valley aggressively. This was prior to applying to YC. But so we got again, we tried to look for a cheap co-working space. We found this law firm that was like really hard to find online. They may have an online presence today, but they had like they were using portion of their legal office as a co-working space, leasing out to startups, because they didn't really have an online presence, like nobody really was using it, but they were literally the cheapest co-working space you can find in the entire Bay Area. Literally, I kid you not, I went to every single co-working space available in San Francisco, down to Sunnyvale. They had the cheapest per desk. But because we were working so hard, the partner of the law firm was very impressed that we were coming out on the weekends, working until like 11 p.m. in the night. So he actually offered us to use a private suite at the same price. So we had a private suite on our own. Of course, we filled out with people, as many people as possible, where it got to a point where it became a little bit disgusting. But anyway, we're dirt cheap. So that worked out. We applied to Y Combinator at end of 2015. We got in. And then again, while we were doing YC, we were again looking for free co-working space. This time there was because we also went through Techstars with our previous consumer app. Techstars had a partnership with Microsoft. They had a fantastic space that, again, not a lot of companies were using. So we're kind of hoarding there. We're drinking all of their free snacks, eating free snacks and all the drinks. We're pretty much to our own. So we were working out of there for probably a little bit more than a month. So that's kind of how we kickstarted Y Combinator. And if you think of Y Combinator, a lot of people think it's like a fancy accelerator program. I believe Michael Seibel was one of the speakers before, but in reality, it's pretty much like 4 dudes working and sleeping out of 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. We didn't have money, so we're like, this is all we could afford. So again, it got to a point of being pretty disgusting. This is my co-founder, back then he was CTO, now chief architect, working on his, I guess, sleeping bag. But we pretty much stayed there throughout the YC. And then we moved down to Mountain View, again, which is basically, we got a 2-bedroom apartment, but basically this time was like 4 or 5 dudes working out of the apartment down in Mountain View. And as you can kind of see, those were our fuels. Like we were cooking ourselves, we were drinking Soylent, or too much alcohol, which I would not recommend at all. And then we presented at Demo Day, and I wrote a small essay within YC community, later published to my blog, which actually got like the most upvotes ever in YC community, titled, "It's okay to be not liked on Demo Day." There are a lot of startups that get a ton of likes and interest from investors during Demo Day. I don't even recall like where these companies are today. Like we had Batchmates who raised a lot of money, multi-million-dollar seed round. Back then, like seed rounds were like considered $1 million to $3 million. The $3 million would be a fantastic seed round. Nowadays, there I see like $10 million seed rounds, which is absurd. But anyway, back then, if you were to raise $2 to $3 million, that was considered massive success. I remember like Batchmates raising $2 million on the day of the Demo Day. We struggled like for weeks to raise $1.5 million. And out of that $1.5 million, like $1 million came from previous friends from my previous startup experience. So we really, really struggled. But fast forward, it's not always the companies that gets most like or most investor hype. It's just the companies that really, really just persevere and, quoting Paul Graham, be relentlessly resourceful over the years. that kind of continues to grow the company. So, and then our partners were Justin Kahn and Michael Seibel, YC partner. Justin was Michael YC partner back then, and both were co-founders of Twitch. Justin also became an angel investor of our company. So here's Michael Seibel, sharp guy, love him. And then a little bit of like, the founder hustle kind of story. So when we were trying to sell to our customers back then, and when we were working with Reddit, we're not even a Series A company. We're like tiny. Maybe we're like 15 people total. So there was zero reason Reddit should trust us. But we, for whatever reason, we had a luck of getting a meeting with Reddit's engineering manager and product manager. I remember this engineering manager had his arms folded. He was very skeptical, like, oh, Reddit moves at lightning speed. We work really long hours. We're innovating so fast. There's no way you guys can keep up with our request. So we were like, no, I think we can work pretty hard. So we like there was a meeting on I believe on a Friday. So on Monday, we actually showed up at their office, was it 9 or 10 a.m. And then we pretty much outworked everyone in the Redis office. We're basically the last one out of the office, and we did for the entire week. So if you get to like 10 p.m., there are not a lot of Reddit employees left. They're kind of looking around this like 3 Asian dudes sitting in a row, like coding something. So they were like walking by our desk and like, oh, who are you guys? Like, are you guys new Reddit employees? Like, no, we're not. Like, we're just like random people trying to like earn your heart. And it turns out some of them were like Reddit executives or directors. So they kind of got aware of us. And then probably, I believe it was like Saturday or Sunday, I got a Slack message like, hey, our security like compliance team like told us like you shouldn't really come into the office and stay that long. We'll work with you. Just like, let's just have a weekly sync up meeting. So that was kind of the moment where they trusted us, like we'll do whatever it takes to get them to be successful. So they ended up becoming one of our larger customer, and still to this date have been a great customer of ours. So that's like, we really try to do things that don't scale. And then we ended up raising Series A in 2017. It was a $16 million Series A. Back then it was a pretty, big sized Series A. And this is, again, the law firm that we worked out of. If you see a little bit of the opening on the left side, that's actually a custom hole that the law firm partner built for us because we were filling up their space. We were using 2 private suites. They had to constantly like run across the hallway to go between the rooms. And the partner's like, hey, do you want me to like create a door for you guys in the middle? So like, yeah, it'd be great. So he actually custom installed a sliding door for us to be able to like use it as our office. So I think it was I think it was total maybe like 400 square feet. We had like 12 people working in that space. So it's getting very humid and dirty. But when our investor walked in to do the due diligence, they were like looking around, it's like, wait, this is it? They're like, I love it. And of course, investors love it because when you're saving money. So we raised Series A, and both of them joined our board of directors. This was our team size back in Series A. Not everyone's on the photo, but in the US team and actually in the Korea team. We also had a larger Korea team where we did about 70-80% of our R&D. This is what our team looked like. We also went through a YC growth program, which is like a graduate school for YC, much smaller batch, 10 to 15 companies per batch, 3 to 4 like executives come and then kind of talk through different topics, whether it be marketing, sales, like CEO, all those stuff. And in our batch, there was like companies like Brex, Airtable, Convoy, a lot of companies that you probably recognize, and a lot of them ultimately became unicorns later on. So I was very excited to be part of the program. Learned a ton. And then we also raised Series B, about $100 million in Series B in 2019. And that was iconic. Also, Tiger Global came in. And then this was when I really felt like, oh, wait, this is like a real company now. It's 2019. We did something called the sales kickoff. Internally, we call it the Global Revenue Summit, where we bring like marketing, sales, like go-to-market related folks all together into a single place where we do like multiple days of training. And this is like when I feel like, oh my God, I don't recognize this company anymore. This is like a real legit company. Like, what do I do here anymore? Anyway, I remember the moment very vividly, and it was like really was exciting. And then last year, we raised another $100 million Series C from other wonderful investors. And these are like some of the more recent photos. We are doing happy hours in our APEC team, San Mateo team picnic, and dinner with our London team, as well as an end of year party. So like, if I see these photos, like none of this would have come out of my head. It's just really a collection of wonderful people's creativity and teamwork. And in like these are the moments you realize you're actually living the dream. Of course, you're always chasing the next growth opportunity, the next milestone, the OKRs, but sometimes it just makes you like really realize that by having these dinners and people get together, you really can kind of really feel that you are indeed living that dream of coming to Silicon Valley, building a growing tech company. And I guess not to sound like a cliche, but really living the American dream. And you made it when you can actually rent out a box suite in baseball game, invite your clients and family members over and host an event. I actually learned that this was like 2 weeks ago, I think, opening game of Giants. I learned that there are 9 players on each team of baseball. It was my first baseball game that I've ever seen. So that was pretty cool. And also, I got invited to this BTS concert last week in Las Vegas. It's like 50,000 people in a stadium. I'm like, holy cow! I only know there are 2 of their songs. I don't know any of them, but it was pretty cool to see. So I feel like our company is really, really growing now that we get this opportunity to work with fantastic customers and partners like these firms. But they may all sound like great, but if you look at it in hindsight over a time horizon, it's a pretty long journey. We started out, if you remember, we started out at the beginning of 2013. So if you look at the timeline in a course of 2 years, the first pretty much 4 years, it was like a really, really dark tunnel of faith. Imagine joining a company for 4 years, whatever you do don't really matter at all. You get a little bit of user blip, like you get paid ridiculously lower than the market salary. But thankfully, a lot of our members, pretty much all of our early members are still at the company, but there is really not a lot of customer feedback. So we went through a dark tunnel of faith, and finally, after good 4 years, we finally reached a product market fit and started growing like crazy to 250 million users on a monthly basis today. So I think people call it like overnight success, 10 years in the making. Well, it took us a really long time, and I don't think we're anywhere close to being successful. We still have a lot of work to do. So that was kind of our journey to becoming a unicorn. But let's talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned throughout the way. So today I want to introduce us a framework, what I call the 2 p.m. framework. It's people, product, market, money. It's a 4th dimension of your business. And you can think of it as a virtual cycle or vicious cycle. Let's say you start out with a market. You found a problem in the market you want to solve. That's your vision. Then now you come up with a product or solution that's going to be solving that problem. To build a product, well, you need to put the team together. But to put the team together, you need to raise money or have some money to hire those people. But by being able to go to market, you can generate revenue or be able to raise money. So it becomes a vicious or virtual cycle. And the entire journey is about how do you get this flywheel to spin and making sure that you're solving the problems in the right quadrants. And you'll always have problems happening in all of these 4 quadrants, regardless of how fast you're growing or how slow you're growing. There will always be problems. Your job is to continue to identify the primary constraints in this flywheel and then solving that bottleneck. So I think Mark Andreessen put it in a different way. It's like when you, as an investor, you're looking at a startup or investment as if it's an onion. You are peeling back the risks layers. So, there's a market risk. Then how do you prove that there's a big enough market opportunity? Oh, there's a product risk. How can you actually hire a technical team or build some technical moat to solve that problem? So it's like peeling the layer one by one. And a lot of people think entrepreneurs are like this, like risk junkies. Actually, I think Jeff Bezos also said that we hate risk. We want to remove the risk as quickly as possible. And by continuing to remove the risk and bottleneck, we end up creating this virtual cycle of a growing company that's constantly solving customers' problems in a scalable way. So that's kind of how I like to think about the business. And here's some of the feedback that we heard along the way. When we were raising money, we were trying to hire people, when we were trying to get customers. So we were always like pushed back on market size initially. Now, if you think about even massively successful company like Twilio, I heard Twilio had a really hard time raising their first Series A. I believe their pitch deck said the entire market size for SMS is going to be like $400 million. Now we know today, Twilio does far more than that in a quarter. So the entire market size has grown far more significantly. But how do you prove that is by, well, having large customers. So it's like a induction, right? You will have one customer, they're like, oh, that's an exception. You have two customers like, oh, is there a pattern? You have three customers like, oh, there's a market. So you want to continue to show the momentum to your own team, but also to investor by showing that you can actually help them imagine the market opportunity by showing the wonderful partners that you work with, and then doing the kind of a bottom-up simulation. Second, if your product's not the best in class, figure out a way to differentiate. Now, if you fast forward, the reasons investors say they want to invest in us is because we have a superior product. But this is like initially when we built this, our customers or investors didn't believe the chat was very easy to do. It was not the best in class. It's like easily replicable. But by working with customers like Reddit and showing through metrics how scalable or how something works, and then how that translates to dollars, you begin to convince the investors and your own team that, hey, what we do actually is pretty hard to do. And there is a value. Look at how much customers are willing to pay so that you're actually helping them really see the value in the product problem that you're trying to solve. We also heard a lot of feedback in the early days. Oh, you don't have the right team to scale. All of your guys are out of Korea. Have you seen any global team? Like, are you going to enter the US market? So we ended up, this is our probably generation 2.5 of our executive team. Our first gen, actually entire members of our first gen team is still at the company, but we ended up continuing to up level and hire executive team here from the Bay Area, but really a diverse team coming from very different backgrounds. So we ended up building out this executive team to be able to convince to ourselves, to customers, and to the investors that we have built a great team that can actually continue to build a company that scales globally. So you're really peeling away the layers of onion one by one. Well, you don't have the resources. Going global, US is expensive. We are out of money. We actually ran out of money multiple times during the YC days. That's where I really built this PTSD almost, because we ran out of money multiple times during our pre-seed to seed days. I had to fund the company out of my own pocket from the proceeds of my first acquisition. So we're kind of keep fueling the company. So I always had built this habit of going out, raising the money earlier than most startups would do. So a lot of companies are advised to go out and raise when you have, let's say, 12 months of runway, maybe. Sometimes a little more, maybe somewhere between 12 to 18 months. If you go out and raise with fewer than 12 months of runway, it gets harder. But I always try to raise when we have 2 to 3 years of runway. And investors always say, well, you have money. Why are you trying to raise? We are raising money because we don't need to. And it's kind of a funny thing, but when you go to bank too, when you try to get a loan, people actually give you more loan at a better interest rate when you actually don't need the money. You'll be surprised when you announce your fundraising at your startup, how many banks reach out to offer you debt financing. We're like, hey, we just got money. We don't need debt, but that's the best time to also get debt financing as well. So that's kind of how capitalism works. But so we always were proactive in raising money. So we raised about a year ago. And if you recall today, or recall a year ago, the market was pretty, let's say frothy, but there was a lot of investor excitement. And we still had close to $100 million from our Series B left in the bank account. So we went out to raise another 100 million. Investors are like, why? But now looking back, it was one of the best decisions because the market pretty much has crashed or corrected in the public market, in the B2B SaaS, or pretty much a lot of companies. So today is actually a much tougher time to raise a growth round than a year ago. So now we have more than $100 million in our bank balance sheet, so we can really focus on executing the growth. So that's kind of our plan is to raise when we don't really need money. And a couple of things that we learned about Silicon Valley along the way. I mean, you guys live here, you guys study here, so you probably know a lot of these examples. But I think what's really unique about Silicon Valley is this is a unique bubble on its own. It's not unlike other parts of the United States, unlike anywhere else in the world. Now, through pandemic, yeah, Silicon Valley may have distributed their Silicon Valleys in the cloud, all that shit. But to be honest, I think still there's so much of talent and craziness here in the Valley that really led to real successes, right? Probably heard from Michael Seibel, Twitch got acquired by Amazon pretty quickly after pivoting to Twitch for $1 billion. If you also think about Cruise, their cruise car is now running around San Francisco, I believe, was acquired by $1 billion. Now it's worth probably $10 billion plus. But if you think about it, both of these were founded by Khan brothers, Justin Khan and Dana Khan, right? So it's insane how much of possibility you get here in Silicon Valley from this ecosystem, giving brothers the courage to go out and start their own companies and both getting acquired for $1 billion plus. Like imagine how proud their parents must feel. I don't know. But anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting. Extrapolating the future. So a lot of investors, I spoke to a bunch of investors outside of US before coming to Silicon Valley. A lot of investors look for patterns from the past. They're like, oh, I've seen the success in Silicon Valley, so we'll invest. They also try to do like what we call geo arbitraging. But here, investors are willing to look into the future. So Boom Supersonic was a batchmate of ours. I remember Blake coming up the stage and pitching, I think there were like maybe 4 to 5 guys, like, oh, we're trying to build a supersonic jet. I'm like, no, you can't. Like, those are what Boeings and big companies do. Like, startups don't build supersonic jet. What are you talking about? Well, fast forward a few years, they are having headquarters in the hangars. They build prototypes. Now they have this deal with United, claiming they can go from San Francisco to Tokyo. I edited to Seoul, but it was originally Tokyo in about 6 hours, which is like half of what it normally takes for other commercial airlines. I'm like, holy shit, this is possible. This is like amazing. So that was a really, I guess, a learning moment for me. I had to change how literally my view of the world. Another batchmate, I remember them pitching that, again, like maybe like 4 years, like, hey, we're going to build life-size rockets. I'm like, no, you can't. Like rockets are for like NASA and maybe Elon Musk with infinite money. Although Elon Musk didn't have infinite money back then. They said, it was like first principle. I remember saying this, like the 80% of the cost that goes into rocket is like labor. So they're going to remove the labor piece by automating the process through 3D printing. So they decided to build the biggest 3D printer in the world, and they did. So on the demo day, they were like presenting these like propulsion parts of the rocket. I'm like, holy cow, I didn't know that was possible. And fast forward a few years later, they're now worth multiple $1 billion, and they're actually doing it. So I'm like, whoa. So I feel like I'm doing the easiest startup possible, software, messaging capabilities, while these guys are building supersonic jets and rockets. So here, investors are willing to extrapolate into the future that has not been proven, but be able to imagine, what if this works? How big can this get? And that's really another primary filter of YC when they look for founders and companies, like, if this works, how big can this get? And other example, like you've probably seen this video where there are 3D printing houses. I'm like, this is a ugly house. No one's gonna live here. Apparently, there are some beautiful looking 3D houses. Companies like Mighty Houses and Mighty Buildings and others, they're doing something similar. So just extrapolate in the future. Don't be critical of the initial kind of prototypes, but like be able to ask ourselves, what if this works? How big can this get? So what? I also do want to share a little bit as an immigrant founder, some of the lessons that I had to learn the hard way to come here and build a global, I guess, tech company. The first lesson is like really to unlearn all the things, because I've done my first startup in Korea. I thought I knew how to build a company. I know how to raise money. A lot of that were very specific to Korean startups. I did not notice. And apparently, whichever country, whichever culture you come from, it's going to be different when you come to Silicon Valley. So being able to unlearn and relearn new stuff is going to be very important, especially coming from Korea. Korea as a country, our key growth strategy over the past 50 years was really the journey from going from extreme poverty to a developed country. So 2 strategies they primarily used one was geographic arbitrage. Wherever they saw something successful outside of Korea, let's say United States, let's say Germany or France or Europe, some parts in Europe, they will bring it to Korea, they'll import it and literally copy it, localize it, nationalize it, and then they'll sell it. That's how Hyundai Motors was made. Pretty much like a lot of the massive businesses in Korea was made using geographic arbitrage. Second was fast follower. Like you probably know some of the electronic manufacturers, basically looking at what someone else has done uniquely or originally, and then just make it better, cheaper, faster through economy of scale, or just harder work, working longer hours. That work really, really well when you're trying to, again, fast follow certain countries or economies based on a proven model. So a lot of questions that get asked within Korean like conglomerates is like, why can't we do that? We have all the money in the world. Let's just throw people at the problem. Then we can create something better. Or let's just make it happen fast. Let's just copy it, but add a little bit of a unique sauce to it. So we'll differentiate. So it always start with some proven model they were trying to like implement. And that was a key strategy for a lot of Korean companies. The issue with that is some of the folks from the engineering probably recognize this. So when you're approaching a problem landscape, that fast follower approach usually creates this immense selection pressure. And you're not trying to like take risk and navigate an unknown space. You want to get to the quickest hill possible, end up in this like local optimum, which is not ideal. So it's like, yeah, it's good. It's not really great because it's not unique or something new or differentiated. It's like cheaper version of something or slightly larger screen or slightly bigger storage or stuff like that. So it's not really going for the global optimum. This works really well when you're going from extreme poverty to developed country, but what happens after? Another thing is like globalization. Back in the days before internet was big, a lot of industries had this, country as a boundaries, a lot of regulations, languages, distribution was a huge hurdle for global companies to enter markets like Korea. So market inherently was protected. But what happens when these barriers disappear due to globalization? Everything starts to flow in. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the first VoIP calls, voice over IP, was actually invented in Korea. But fast forward, a few years, Skype emerged, became the world's dominant player. Now, like Zoom, other players. So where's Dialpad today? Actually, there's another company called Dialpad, which is a US company. Social networks. Like Korea had multiple social networks since the 1990s. Like obviously Facebook took over the world and then also ultimately came back into Korea. So Facebook basically replaced the de facto standard social network in Korea as well. Online videos. We had, online videos, live streaming that was invented before YouTube. They completely dominated Korean market, but now, fast forward again, good 10 years, YouTube is the #1 video platform in Korea as well. So when the dams start to open, the local players who are only optimizing for local optima get wiped out by these global optima players. Similar social media, we had a dominant player in the blog space. Instagram came in and replaced the social media for all individuals. So the more you remove these borders between countries or culture or language, it just really becomes a winner takes all market. And we've learned this over and over and over again in Korea. But still, a lot of founders in Korea start a Korean company aiming in Korean market. But I believe in the next 10 years, if you don't globalize and if you don't try to like win the market in the major markets like Silicon Valley or I don't call it China, Singapore, wherever, there will be a tipping point where better funded, bigger companies that are reached closer to global optimum will come in and take those market away from this Korean company. So it's really transitioning from Korean first or local first to a global first strategy. So again, kind of using the Korean example, in the 1950s to 60s, the national GDP per capita was below or around $100, basically, like 60 years ago. Everyone was making about $100 a year, so about $10 a month, right? Within 60 months, now it's about $47,000 in GDP per capita, PPP. So roughly 10% year-over-year growth for the past 60 years. Again, the two primary strategy was geographic arbitrage and fast following. Now, what got us here won't get us there because now we are among the developed countries. So we have to invent things that are not already being created. We can't no longer just keep copying, whether it be Apple or Microsoft or someone else. We have to be able to create novel solutions. So now the goal has become reaching the global optimum. So it's no longer like, oh, let's be the #1 in Korean market. Like how do we become #1 in Southeast Asia or US or Europe? So it became a very different mindset, different skill set, different set of experiences that's required. We, Korea as a country, have not built that muscle yet. So I'm encouraging the founders to think about what is no longer about is what's proven. Well, let's import that thing or localize it, but think about what is different and unique in a way that we need to find a one axis that's clearly differentiated, that's valuable for the customer, that we can claim that it's the #1 in the market globally. So starting with that. Second, starting with a problem that a customer has, not with the model of a company or product that you want to benchmark. So this is another very important piece. And 3, it's more cultural thing. Maybe folks in the audience may resonate. a lot of collectivistic countries like Korea, Japan, China, is a very high context culture versus America's, where countries there are very diverse in culture, language. It's a low context culture. What I mean by that is high context culture assumes a lot of people have, well, shared context. So they kind of assume when you say something abstract, they expect the listener to understand what you're talking about. Whereas a low context culture, because we don't share a lot of context, the speaker is the burden of the speaker to be able to communicate clearly of their intent and the reasons, so that the burden and the responsibility is on the speaker or the leader or the manager. Versus high context culture, the responsibility is on the listener, people who's the individual contributors, because they have to know what's up. So what ends up happening is, like, in Asian culture, like there's a lot of this hierarchy and the kind of like serving culture where the people who work for their bosses try to figure out what the boss likes and try to like over anticipate and expect and prepare everything in advance, because they have the burden of figuring things out, what the bosses want or what the customers want. Whereas in US, bosses need to be able to communicate clearly and set clear expectations and so forth. So kind of changing the mindset was a huge challenge for an entrepreneur like me. And really just getting out of comfort zone. When I first came to US, I didn't know what networking events were like, because there's no such thing, at least back in the days of Korea. We don't do networking. What are you talking about? We maybe gather 3 to 4 people, we drink like hell, and then wake up next morning hungover. That was our way to network. Like gathering in groups, maybe with a beer, drinking for 3 hours, and talking about like work. That felt very odd, but I had to force myself into this environment for years to be able to adapt to this. But ultimately, the goal is to build a global playbook where we can apply some of these logics and make it a repeatable and scalable process. So I want to end this session with this. There's a concept called the 4-minute mile. It was believed that it was impossible for a human being to run a mile faster than 4 minutes. But sometime in 1954, this person named Roger Bannister was the first person in human history to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. Immediately after that, 1,400 people have broken this record. So it was for maybe centuries, no one believed it was possible to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. Now apparently thousands of people do. So for me, going global was not a choice, but literally the only path, because I knew the globalization was happening, the barriers were lowering, all the global startups got to pour into Korean market. So I had to go out and prove ourselves. We are indeed #1 in Silicon Valley. So I can one day go to other countries and show the rest of the world that we are the #1 player and enter those markets, because we can be the beneficiary of the globalization instead of becoming the victim. So this is the way. And our dream is to power 1 billion people's conversations every day. Today, we power 250 million every month. So we still have a lot of opportunity to grow. And that's what we're going after. So that's a little bit, it took a little bit longer than I thought. Anyway, I'll wrap things up. I'll take any questions.
안녕하세요. Hello.
Oh, hi,
I'm Sian from Korea. I'm exchange student and studying startup semester at UC Berkeley. So I've been watching your YouTube videos, and then thank you for today's speaking. It is really amazing. My question is, you said this experience in Silicon Valley changed a lot in your life and your companies. So could you recommend, if you were me, then what experience do you recommend me to do here?
So I read this blog post written by someone, I think it was from Israel, or something like Soft Landing in Silicon Valley. Basically, is telling what I talked about in the comfort zone. Try to surround yourself, immerse yourself in an environment where you have no choice but to like adapt. So when I first came to Silicon Valley, I intentionally chose a location where I was furthest away from all the Korean community. Like there's a bunch of people in South Bay, and also in San Francisco. I intentionally chose like middle of the peninsula because it was the thinnest Korean population. So I could no longer like hang out with other Korean folks late in the evening drinking beer. I had to force myself to hang out with other founders of different culture, different backgrounds. And that really helped me, one, like learn how to pitch better to investors, but also like be able to like form a rapport, learning about the sales, all those things. So really learning about the business culture of here And also, like if you think about our investor base and all the executive team, we intentionally look for investors, not just from like Korean Americans, but actually like people who are here are good at what we do, understand our industry. So we really try to optimize for, again, the global optimum. And this is like, again, going against really the human nature of finding comfort and finding like safety zone, is pulling yourself out of that comfort zone. So how do you put yourself in a place where you just have to immerse yourself in this environment? So I recommend just joining a startup, early stage startup, maybe like seed pre-product market fit. You may not be able to learn too much. So maybe like a Series A, when they just found the early part of the product market fit, learn how they build a team, how they continue to build a roadmap, how they do the early part of sale, and then see them scale from, let's say, I don't know, $1 million in or $3 million in AR to 10 million, 20, 50 million. That would be a great journey to learn about all the different challenges of living, plus growing professionally.
Thank you so much.
I think we have Cervantes.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, our moderator and host. Hey, John, thank you so much for sharing. Very exciting to see a Korean startup CEO coming to Silicon Valley. My question, I'm coming from Taiwan. I speak Mandarin, a little Japanese. And I want to ask you, when you see the cultural difference for the Asian startup, particularly among Chinese and India, Korean is a very different cultural background. And I want to learn, how do you think about when they come to the US, what's your cultural observation among Korean, Chinese, Indian startup? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I can't really speak on behalf of our other cultures like China or India, but just I think China and Korea may have more of a philosophical like foundations dating maybe 5,000 years. But just generally, again, I talked a little about the low context, high context culture, but also where you put like transaction and relationships. Let me give you an example. In Korea, a lot of sales conversations, a lot of hiring, a lot of things are built first with the relationship. So a lot of the saying goes like, oh, let's have lunch or dinner together. So you'd actually offer, oh, would you, like, as a first meeting, you'd offer to have lunch or dinner together. And for folks who actually work in Korea, probably understand this. Like after lunch, what you do is you have an hour of lunch together. They always go grab a coffee together. So you'll be spending maybe 2.5 hours in your first meeting to qualify and build a relationship. If that hits off, then you talk about business and like into nitty-gritty details. And even that conversation may happen in the third meeting, not even the first meeting. Whereas here, initially I felt very odd because I offered lunch and they're like, no, I don't have time for it. There was like, I have 15 minutes to hop on a quick call. I'm like, this is rude. I'm like, don't you like respect humanity? But I realized actually here's more like the context setting. Like, why do I have to talk to you? Not in a rude way, but like, why do we, like, what's the common goal? Do we have a business case? Like, is there a shared context? If that's qualified, then you're like, okay, this makes sense for us to spend time. And then you may have an in-person meeting. And then you may, after like signing a deal, maybe you go on a lunch together. But even with lunch, you don't go like have coffee and talk about life and kids, all those things in like one seating, you eventually build up. So that was kind of a very interesting cultural learning experience for me. And I think it's the respect for time versus respect for relationship. At least Korean culture, maybe Chinese culture is about building a relationship and then talking about work, whereas US is like, am I wasting your time? So we'd always talk about like, oh, not to waste your time. I know you're a super busy guy. Like we always say that. And in here in US, and also that also shows up in emails too. So a lot of founders, I've made the same mistake. When I first send my cold outreaches to like people in US, I send this really long email talking about the weather and all the respect, admiration I have for you, and like attach a long PDF and a PowerPoint. So please take a look at all of this in a really long email. Of course, today I know you'll immediately delete or archive it. Whereas here it's like you send a very succinct blurb, like key points why you should take attention, read through this email. If this was interesting, let's hop on a quick introductory call. So you're trying to like earn your minutes through emails and conversation. That was also very interesting learning. Now it's like, of course, it's obvious, but a lot of people don't understand those things. One last thing is when you're talking about collaboration between different culture, filter of individualism versus collectivism plays a huge role. And people don't understand this until they get into huge conflict. And if you start to peel the layers, people really understand this is not language, this is not time zone issue, it's a cultural issue. To give an example, let's say HR, we don't use the word HR at a company, we call it people and culture. So when we set up a policy in US, we just say, hey, hiring managers, make your best judgment. Like if there's a business case, it's your job to make that decision and just like get it done and let us know how it goes. Whereas in our counterparts in Korea, they would always ask for like specific guidelines. Oh, can we spend here? Can we spend not there? What's the limit on the budget? So from US side, we're always frustrated. Why are they asking for such a great detail? Like, do they want us to micromanage them? Like, why can't they just like make a decision on their own? If you look through the lens of individualism, that makes perfect sense. Why are these people not capable of making their own decisions? But from Asian culture, it's about, am I disrupting the harmony? Am I being inequitable to other teams? If I do this on my own, how will other team perceive of my decision? And what will they start like asking for? So how does it disrupt the entire consistency and fairness of the organization? So by having clear guidelines that are clearly defined, then they can follow the guidelines so they know it's not gonna like create inequality or inconsistency across the organization. So it's actually a very different cultural lens, but people who've never really worked in those contexts don't understand it intuitively. Why are they doing this? So we just kind of like bridge those gaps through conversations.
That's good. Thank you so much, John. Thank you.
All right, I think we're at time.
Hello, John. I ask one more.
Sure.
Yeah. I wonder when you don't know what you don't know, and what is your how to figure out the breakthrough in this situation. So what is your personal tip, or what is your personal know-how?
Yeah, that's the exact phrase I used when I was pitching to our investors. Like, I don't know what I don't know. So I'm really looking to your partnership from our board of directors. But it's I think the big five factors. I don't know if you guys know about the big five factor or the ocean model. Basically, like openness. Keep yourself open-minded. Always have the growth mindset. Seek advice, but more tactically, always look for people who are maybe 1 or 2 stage ahead of your career. Let's say if you're a startup founder, if I'm C stage, I look for advice, go for advice from people who've done Series A or Series B recently. Instead of people like in a public traded company, they can give you some like life advice, but they've forgot about, like, if you just got into university, you're a freshman, you can teach high school kids about how to apply to school. But if you graduate like university 10 years ago, probably a lot of things have changed. So you can't really give like tactical solid advice to high school students anymore. So you want to seek out people who have maybe spent 3-5 years ahead of you, so you can get more advice that's concrete then you can apply. So I've done a ton of that through Y Combinator Network. I always reached out to YC alumni for advice on like sales or building teams, hiring executives, and all the board dynamics, all those things. I will always look for advice from people who are maybe a stage or 2 ahead of me.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Sherry, go ahead.
Hi, John. Amazing presentation and advice. I'm originally from Taiwan. And in the past 2 years, I was actually in Silicon Valley. So I totally can feel you that it is really hard for me to throw myself into those networking events. So I'm really interested in startups and venture capital, and I want to immerse myself into that environment. And I definitely want to build my networks a lot more. What would be your advice for me to, like get into this industry?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I guess to be transparent, a lot of founders who are unicorn founders still ask the same question. Am I ultimately gonna continue to be a builder and an entrepreneur, or am I gonna be just one day become an investor? So and a lot of people, maybe some people have very clear answers, some people don't. That's why a lot of people, after they make money, kind of become investors, because to be honest, it's an easier, much better lifestyle. But probably not as purposeful, if that makes sense. So you have to like really think about what you enjoy doing at a very kind of like a behavioral level. Like think about what do you get excited about. For instance, like as a founder, you get to witness, let's say you build a team of 300 people, 3,000 people, seeing them just hanging out, just building a team with diverse set of people, a lot of grinding, blood, sweat, and tears, but being able to celebrate with a glass of beer, stuff like that, versus investors get to work with a lot of people with different backgrounds, but not as your team, but you're really giving them counsel, advice, network, capital, but you're not really in them building together. There's a different value you create for the world. And just really try to understand what is the thing that keeps you going. It's not what other people think. Ultimately, if you're 20, 30 years into your career, you'll probably start to understand more about yourself, not about through the lens of like what other people think is good, but like what you don't want to do anymore, what drains your energy. So think about like talk to people, look at the videos or interviews, and actually, if you can, do internship in both environments and see which one you like better. But I do think like VCs have a better lifestyle because I also angel invest and have a seed fund of my own. But it has pros and cons.
Can I ask like what are the pros and cons in both industries?
Sorry?
I mean, can I ask like what are the pros and cons in both industries? Because I was thinking about doing internship.
Well, this goes on a record, so I don't know how much in gory detail I can get. VC is hard as an outcome. VC's level of activity is not as hard as a great startup building experience, but it's hard to get a fantastic outcome as a managing a fund, because you do really have to find those 10x, 100xers, a few in a fund, which is always hard. The benefit of being an investor is you do get a pretty nice lifestyle. You can go on 2 weeks vacations in summer and winter with your kids, hop in on a board call in your car. That's kind of considered okay. As a founder, you have to have a perfect camera setting, all nervous, waiting for your board to show up, have your scripts written down. So it's a little bit more tense. But at the end of the day, let's say if you're Elon Musk, let's use Elon Musk as an example. If you're building a SpaceX, you built a rocket that may potentially save humanity. How awesome is that? Well, maybe their investors are patting themselves like, hey, I backed SpaceX maybe 5 years ago, give them some money that our LP gave me money with. Like, that's great that you're doing it. But if you're creating electric cars or space rockets or powering up billion people's conversations like sendbird, that's a pretty awesome value you're creating and something that you can actually be proud of. Not saying that investors are not proud of themselves, but so there is something very visceral and fulfilling about creating something with your team that you can give to your customer and seeing their eyes lit up, and they are just really excited about working with you, and they're so happy that you exist. That's also very fulfilling experience. So you can't really like read through this. You have to experience to know, oh, this is what I want for the rest of my life.
Okay.
John, we have one question in person.
Oh, sorry. I think you mute yourself.
Give us a second.
Sorry. Hi, John. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you so much for being here. Your presentation was really interesting. I had one quick question about, you mentioned having a startup prior, and I was wondering if your success with that startup enabled you to change your decision-making with sendbird as to how risk averse you were or the kinds of things you were willing to undertake.
Yeah, 100%. So I sold my company. Luckily, it wasn't like a mega exit, but investors made money and got to buy a house and car and stuff like that. So that really gave me a lot of psychological safety net, like financial safety net. Like I could easily run out of money very quickly with that one. But I built this psychological safety net. There is a way. There is a way to figure things out. We also went through a lot of existential crisis with our first startup, but we've pivoted and found things out. So it gave me that kind of a little bit of resilience and then psychological safety net. Hey, I can take a little bit more risk. One key lesson that I learned during my first startup was like expectation management. Like when I did my first startup, I had this like fantastic projection. Like if I raise $500,000, I'll be generating $10 billion in revenue in 3 years, and I'll be the biggest company ever. Stuff like that. It's like, no, that doesn't not come true. Just knowing how to build a realistic model, manage your own expectations, manage team members, customers, investors' expectation. That was a brutal, painful lesson to learn. So just going through that exercise really helped me a lot. also use this analogy. Let's say when you're swimming, you want to become a diver. First, you have to like learn how to hold your breath a little bit, control your breath, control your muscle, get a little bit used to it. Once you get used to it, maybe use like a tank to go a little bit deeper. Maybe, you know, in the future, you dive through a submarine or stuff like that. You have to build your way into that. So I think having some level of experience of one cycle of building, starting, fundraising, and selling a company, it's like getting a small oxygen tank. Now I can go a little bit deeper and longer. And when you do actually like additional round of capital raising, maybe do a little bit secondary, now you can actually go deeper and swim longer. So it really build you that muscle of being able to think longer term, execute towards longer term by going through those cycles of experience. And I think that first loop really gave me the confidence, like, hey, I think what could go wrong? I can come to US, it's gonna be fine, and it did. But so I think it did help me in that way psychologically.
Okay, I think thank you for that. We have one more question.
All right. You're muted.
All right. Hello, sorry for the tech issues. Earlier in your talk, you mentioned about how you had to convey like how you were making momentum to your team and to investors. How did you, when you were in your early stages, how did you convey to them that there is this large market and that you were going to actually achieve that?
Oh, so when we were pivoting December?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There are a couple of tactics I used. Actually, it wasn't like a pivot on a certain day, right? Because I learned that expectation management is very important. I actually created I want to pivot around like May or June. So I reverse engineer what are the specific milestones and when I need to communicate to whom. So initially, obviously, the people inside knows firsthand, because like if I'm working on something else, obviously my co-founders and team will like send something different, right? So I was fully transparent with them. Hey, with our main consumer product, our growth is slowing down, but I feel there's a little bit of opportunity. So I'm gonna like do the customer discovery in a certain way, but it's still early. So I'm gonna spend a little bit of time on it, but meantime, we'll still be on our core business. So give them heads up. Also like try to explain to them why this might make sense. So really sharing the context upfront with them. Now, investors, obviously they gave us money to the first part of the business. So I also communicated to them a little bit later on after talking to some of these potential partners and customers, like, hey, we found this opportunity while we were trying to build a messaging feature for our own app. So we have a couple of customers lined up, but it's early. I will let you know if there's any pipeline or dollar amounts associated that it signals something different. So it took about 2 to 3 months, and after we are continuing to hit a little bit of like we got a $50 a month customer, then we signed a like $100,000 reseller agreement. So I try to like bring the dollar amount up front. I ask all of our customers and partners to like sign an agreement, show us the dollar amounts that I can use that to create momentum and conviction within our team and our investors, and then continue to like manage the expectation, dial it up over time. And then on the May, when we hit certain customer milestone, we're like, this is the day where I'm going to go to tell our investors that actually, I think this is a bigger opportunity. We're going to switch gears and focus here. And we're going to create a plan to wind this business down. Also like communicate individually with the investors, and then publicly, this is what we're going to do. So it wasn't like, a week of exercise. It was actually over a 6 month period of multiple rails, and then kind of managing it, the timeline like a Gantt chart, basically. But it was through customer validations, testimonials, logos, and dollar amounts to show that there was something real here.
All right, John. Thank you. I think that's about it.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Can we have a round of applause for John?
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks a lot, John. We really appreciate it.